I appreciate that word of encouragement. We need to have a brief meeting of trustees tonight about some things about the bookstore for a minute before we go home tonight. We'd like to see them. And if you have a Bible tonight, turn to 1 Samuel 17. 1 Samuel 17. Now in 1 Samuel 17, you're getting to a very familiar part of the Bible if you read the Bible at all. And the Bible's filled with these stories everybody knows about. Almost any boy or girl in America that's had any dealing with the church anywhere knows about David and Goliath. And Daniel the lion's den and Jonah the belly of the whale and all that. And sometimes we take these stories so much for granted because they're children's stories that sometimes we forget some great deep truths that are found in these passages. And this one here, 1 Samuel 17, has more information in than a lot of people care to find out about. And it's a great picture of some things. It's talking about the destruction of a giant. Now, from the standpoint of a Christian's life, that giant stands for a besetting sin. A sin that's bigger than all the rest of the sins. And some of the sins you get victory over pretty quick. And some of them you have a terrible time with. And some of them you'll fight literally a lifetime with. And that's what Goliath represents. The Bible's filled with stories about giants. There were giants of the earth before the flood and after the flood. You read that there were giants on the earth before that and after that, after the flood, when the fallen angels, the sons of God, came in the daughters of men. And when the Jews come to the land of Palestine, that's when the first thing that shows up is the giants. And they come back there and say, well, we were like grasshoppers in their sight. And the Jews that came back with unbelief said, we can't get in there, we can't attack that place. And they said, why not? Said, they're too big. There were two fellows came back from there that decided the bigger they were, the harder they fall. And that was Joshua and Caleb. And when Joshua and Caleb came back and announced that, the rest of the bunch said, no, we can't do it, we won't go in. And that cost the Jews 40 years wandering in the wilderness. That is right there, that unbelief. And Caleb and Joshua, they got through. They got in the land. The rest of them, 600,000 troops at that time, all went to pieces, and that was the end of them. They died out there in the wilderness. And Joshua and Caleb got through. And that picture's there. When God talks about that thing to the Jews, he mentions that in the New Testament over and over again. Over and over again. The fact that they didn't have unbelief to get in there. They said they couldn't enter in because of unbelief. He said the gospel was preached to them as unto us. And of course he's not talking about the gospel you're saved by. But he's talking about the good news that they could overcome the giants if they had faith, and they didn't have faith. And he said only Caleb and Joshua were going in because they believed what I said. So they got in. And then after they got in there, they found out the giants weren't all done away with. They got rid of the Anakims, but there were giants down in Philistine territory, in Gath and Ekron and some of those places. And Goliath is the giant of Gath. And he comes out to battle against Saul and his troops in 1 Samuel chapter 17. And then David goes out, you know the story, goes out with a sling and clobbers him, then goes over and cuts off his head. And the lesson the Lord is showing you there is a spear and a shield and a sword, which is standard military equipment back in those days, cannot be as powerful as a sling in the hands of the right person. And what that means from the standpoint of a child of God is that God has chosen the foolish things of this world, confound the wise, the weak things of this world, the things that are not, the things that are base, to bring to naught the things that are, that no flesh should glory in his presence. And the Old Testament is filled with that kind of stuff. For example, Gideon defeats the host with lamps and pictures, which is absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Can't be done. But he did it. And you take, when God calls Moses, Moses wants to know what equipment he's got. He said, what do you got in your hand? And he said, a staff. And then God takes care of Pharaoh with a staff, a shepherd's staff, which is silly, but it works. And the Old Testament is filled with cases like that, where something that looked like it couldn't have anything to it or power at all, overcome something that has power and strength. Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, she kills a fellow with a tent peg. That fellow was the captain, Sisera, the captain of the host of Syria, that old boy of Sisera. And old Sisera, he was giving the Jews a hard time for something like 10 years with chariots of iron. And then a woman gets hold of a tent peg and slaps it through his head. And what the Lord is showing you there is God's chosen the foolish thing of this world, the weak thing, the things that are not, the things that are base, to bring to nothing the things that are, that no flesh should glory in his presence. The principle is found throughout. Samson defeats him with a jawbone of an ass. That's a strange weapon to use. A donkey's jawbone kills 1,000 men with it. God has chosen the foolish things in this world, the things that are weak, the things that are nothing. Shamgar defeats his enemies with an ox goad. That's a piece of farming equipment. In this case here, the thing is a sling. Now this sling, as you know, is not a type. It's not a slingshot. I mean, the boys and girls naturally they think of a sling, they think of a slingshot, and it's not a slingshot, kids. It's a different kind of thing. And this thing that he kills this giant with is a long leather thong, about that long. And as he comes down here, there's a pocket right in the middle of it, about that big. And you take a stone about the size of a golf ball and put it in that pocket, and then you have this end strapped to your wrist. This piece comes down here like this, and you put this stone here, and then you take the loose end of the sling and put it in here like this. So it hangs down that way about 2 feet with the golf ball in there. You take it and go like this with it. And when you get it going real good, you let the thing go. And for about the first 30 yards, it comes at you just like Arnold Palmer hit with a number one driver. And believe me, if that thing hits you in the head, it's Marble Orchard, brother. You're in the box. You're in the box. I mean, it'll tear you all to pieces. And that's what happened to him. That thing will kill you just good as an 88 right strapped in the eyes. You couldn't kill any deader if you had a 45 right between your eyes, got hit with it. And so he comes out with a sling and he prevails over the giant. Now that's the bare face of it. That's just the bare story. But there's some great things in there. Now, there are 3 major lessons that you can learn from reading this story about David and Goliath. And every Christian needs to learn these 3 things because he's going to be in a fight. Paul said, fight the good fight of faith. And Paul says, endure hardness, a good soldier of Jesus Christ. When Paul got through with his life, he said, I fought a good fight. I finished the course. I've kept the faith. Henceforth, so forth and so on. And that military figures all the way through there. The child of God in this age has to fight against the world, has to fight against the flesh, and has to fight against the devil. And so he needs to know something about this warfare, and it's illustrated in this story here about David and Goliath. All right, the first thing you want to learn about this is, number 1, when you go out to fight the devil, or the world, or the flesh, you cannot go in your own strength. And that's the hardest thing to learn. Take that passage you're looking at right there, and that passage you're looking at there. Look at the confidence in the flesh. Look at Goliath there in verse 45 and 48. Verse 45 and 48. That's Goliath right before he got killed. That's Goliath. You know what you find there looking at verse 45 and 48? He doesn't wear a helmet. He had a helmet. Back there at the beginning of that passage, you'll find that he had a helmet and a spear and a shield and all that stuff. It lists all his equipment, and he's got a helmet. He doesn't have it there in verse 45 and 48. He has a sword and a spear and a shield, but no helmet. Isn't that a bad move? The Bible says about that the New Testament for the child of God, he ought to take the helmet of salvation. Without salvation, a man isn't going to do anything. I mean, when you lose your head, literally, get decapitated, you can't go to the first aid station and say, fix me up. Your head's gone. You're decapitated. And you take that old boy was so confident. He was so confident that when he came to David, he didn't put his helmet on. Verse 47, and he arose. Is that what it says? Is that 47? 48? 48, and he arose and came. He was sitting down. That boy was sitting down. He wasn't walking up and down there. He'd been going up and down that place for days, 40 days, and making fun of him and say, give us a man, come on, fight, come on out and fight, come on, fight me. But when David comes out there, he sits down. And he sits down because he says, why, they sent a shepherd boy out here with a staff. Am I a dog that you come in with staves? That kind of thing. The old boy's overconfident. You know what he's sure of? He's sure he can whip David. He's absolutely certain. I can do it. Let me do it. I can handle it. God has to take us through the years, brethren, this show us over and over again. We can't. He has to do it over and over again. And most of the trouble of defeat in the Christian life is due to the fact that he retains confidence in himself. And what I'm teaching you is completely contrary to all you're going to learn in any public school in the world. In the public school, have pride in yourself, believe in yourself, develop yourself, have faith in yourself. I'm telling you just the opposite. Just give it up and quit. You cannot go in your own strength. You take Goliath, he went in his own strength, and I'm sure he was strong as a couple of oxen, and he got killed. That's the reason. Did you ever stop thinking about it? That's the main reason why a man goes to hell when he goes. He's trusting he can make it himself. That's the main reason a man goes to hell, is because he'll not trust Christ. You know why he won't trust Christ? Because he thinks he can do it himself. It's one of these do-it-yourself things. Do it yourself. The world always does that, see. You can do it. The other boy, try. We're number one. Just have faith in yourself. You just believe in yourself. Winning is the thing, Shut up, man. As long as you keep that attitude in the Christian life, God's going to punch you and punch you and punch you till you're punched out. Until you get to the place where you say, I can't do anything without the Lord. I can't do a cotton-picking thing, Lord. If you don't help me, I'm shot. And you've got to come along there somewhere. And some of you ain't never been there yet. Giving up close to it. But not, you still got a little mental reservation there, And you'll keep on getting whipped. You get rid of your mental reservations. You can't go in your own strength. That's the first thing that comes along. And like I said, it's contrary to everything you'll learn in the public school system. Gay pride. Have pride in the fact that you're a pervert. Well, you'll die of VD, and if you don't die of VD, you'll die anyway before you're 50. The average life for those practicing homosexuals is under 45. Just have faith. You can do it. You can do it. You can do it. You can't do it. You can't do it. You know what Christ said? Jesus Christ said, without me, you can do what? Now, how about that? Without me, you can do nothing. That's what he said. Now, you've got to realize that, and that's good. You've got to incorporate that in your life as a Christian. And when you come up to a problem, the first thing you have to do is give up all hope of ever handling the thing yourself. And as long as you keep thinking you can do it, God will let you do it, and then you make the biggest mess you ever saw. So the first thing is you can't go in your own strength. We're having promise keepers. Bunch of proud, self-righteous jerks. The idea advertised the world. We're the ones that keep our promises. I bet half those birds owe money they won't get paid back in 15 years. Promise keepers. Oh, the strut of the flesh. That's the strut of the flesh. You say, well, what you drawing up there, Brother Ruckman? You're drawing David and Goliath? You say, well, those dead men doing around there? David standing on. Well, I'm going to change the thing a little bit. I'm making a spiritual application. And what I've got here is a Christian who's already had some battles. And he's whipped them. But now he's up against the big one. He says, let us lay aside every weight. And then he says, the sin that does so easily beset us. Folks talk about a besetting sin. It's one sin that you've had trouble with more than any other sin. And you tried this, you tried that, you tried this, and it's the giant in your life. And the reason why you don't have victory is you can't conquer them there giants. That's the problem. So I've got this fellow here. He's already whipped a few giants. But they're not really big. They're just about the size he is. These are just regular troops in here. And now he's up against a big one. So, lesson number one, you cannot go in your own strength. No way to think of it. Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo, long about in the afternoon, kept waiting, and finally Field Marshal Ney told him, he said, Emperor, under the circumstances, and Napoleon said, I make circumstances. And then lost his shirt and died in exile. That's the talk. I make him. I got faith in myself. I know what I'm doing. Don't tell me what to do. I know what I'm doing. I make circumstances. No, you don't. God makes circumstances. You take Hooker before the Battle of Mary's Heights in Fredericksburg. He was all tuned up fine. And when he saw where Lee was in his position on Mary's Heights, he said, I've got him where I want him now, and not even God could deliver him out of my hand. And those Yankees went up that hill 5 times and left the cream of their army on that hill dead and were treated back over the Rappahannock. Just lost their shirt 5 times up that hill. Didn't make it a time. Just got butchered. What's that? That's the fellow who has faith in himself and believes in himself. I've got him where I want him now, not even God himself. Careful, boy. Careful, stupid. Watch your big mouth. Not even God. Careful there, buddy. Careful. You know who you're dealing with, man. Not even God could get him out of my hand. God can do anything. All things are possible with God. Don't you tell what he can do, what he can't do. That's what they did. Lesson number 1. You can't go out to meet the giant in your own strength. It won't work. It won't work. Look at verse 11. Look at verse 33. 11:33. Look in there. 11:33. And 11, when the men of Israel hear this giant out there stomping around, they were all scared to death. Verse 11. And Saul was trembling too. Saul couldn't handle him. And when you stop to think about it, if any man in the world could have handled Goliath, it would have been Saul. You know what the Bible says about Saul? The Bible says from his shoulders upward he was higher than all the people. Well, I'm sure you had some fellows 6 feet tall in Israel. And Saul's shoulder was 6 feet tall. The guy was 6 feet tall. Saul's shoulders were 6 feet. That means he was probably 7 feet tall. If anybody could have taken on Goliath, it would have been Saul. You want to see what kind of condition Saul's in? Look at verse 33. David come there and said, I'll go out and get him. I'll go out and get him. Let me at him. I'll get him. And Saul says, you can't get him. You're a youth. And he's a man of war from his youth. See that? He doesn't think David can take him. He's scared too. That old Goliath had him all shook up. And what's the trouble? Well, Saul was going to count on his own strength, and he figured his own strength couldn't make it. And it was right, it couldn't. But he wouldn't trust the Lord. David wasn't going to count on his strength, but he's going to count on the Lord's strength to get him by, and he got by. Lesson number 1, I'm going to repeat it, and I'm going to repeat it, and I'm going to repeat it, and I'm going to repeat it until you get it. You got to get it. You can't go in your own strength. And those who have tried to go in their own strength always made a mess of things. Napoleon, he might have won Austerlitz and a bunch of battles he fought, and Jena and some of those battles he fought, and went down in Egypt and all this and that, but he couldn't whip snuff. When he died there in Elba from overusing snuff and infected jaw. You take Freud, Sigmund Freud, the famous psychiatrist, going to tell you how to live, and tell your children how to live and all this stuff, and how to cope and get with tension, and get rid of your inhibitions and all this stuff. He died after 5 operations on his jaw for cancer. He couldn't quit fooling around with tobacco, chewing tobacco. That fellow fooled around chewing tobacco. He had 5 operations on his jaw, and he had so much morphine in him after a while. He told the doctor, he said, you promised me if it got so bad I couldn't take it that you'd dope me out. He wanted to commit suicide, taking morphine. And he could tell you how to live. He could all that kind of stuff, but he couldn't handle it. He had a giant in his life. And someday you'll have one in yours, maybe. You take Mickey Mantle. He was a famous ball player. I don't guess anybody's thought about him lately. He was so worried about McGuire. Mickey Mantle, same crowd. Babe Ruth, same crowd. You know what trouble that Mickey Mantle and Babe Ruth had? Liquor. They're both a couple of sock drunks. Both of them. But they could handle the ball. Knock out the home runs. Put on a good show. But he couldn't handle a bottle of liquor. I can take it. I can handle it. No, you can't. I don't know how long you've been alive or how much you know, and probably some of you know a lot of things I don't know and never will know. But I know one thing for sure that maybe some of you don't know. And I've discovered in life, and I'd say without hesitation, if I've learned one thing in life, and I learned several things, but if I've learned one for sure, I've learned that I am not intelligent enough to guide my life. I've got that one down. I'm not. If I had 10 times the education I had and 10 times the experience, I still couldn't handle it. There's somebody that knows more than I do, boy, more than I do. He knows everything, and I don't know what he knows, and I'll never know what he knows, and he can handle it better than I can, because he knows all the angles. I don't know them all. You know what's going to happen. You know where it's at. You don't know what a day may bring forth. Maybe some of you won't be here next Sunday permanently. Maybe you'll be gone. I don't know. Maybe you'll be dead. I don't know. Maybe I'll be dead. Maybe another preacher up here. I don't know. I know one thing. I'm not smart enough to run the thing, and God's smart enough to run it. I got that one worked out. You take Presley. Elvis Presley. Had the world with a tail, I guess you know. All the women he wanted, all the dope he wanted, and all the music and fame and fortune he wanted, and all the money he wanted. But he couldn't handle the dope. He couldn't handle the dope. He doped himself to death. His step brother there in the family said when he took those doses before he committed suicide, he took 3 regular doses, and one time he was supposed to take something like 6 hours apart, or 8 hours apart. Took all three of them in one shot. They committed suicide. The papers say, the papers know what they're talking about, he still committed suicide. You say, why? Couldn't handle it, couldn't handle it, couldn't handle it, couldn't handle it. Well, just by the time fellows, I can handle it, I can, I got it, then the whole thing goes to pieces. You got to learn that you can't do it in your own strength. I'm sure some of you seen that picture of the flag raising on Iwo Jima. And one of those fellows that raised that flag is a Native American Indian, one of those soldiers, one of those Marines. Another boy from Arizona, New Mexico, someplace, I forget the exact place. But he was one of those flag raisers. He's up there in that thing, the brave man going up there, and during that terrible battle and went through that thing. And he's down in history forever because of the picture that was taken of those fellows raising that flag. And you know what happened to him? He got back to America, and he got back to America. He was a hero. They made a big fuss over him, had his picture in all the papers, you know, gave him some medals and stuff, and a couple of banquets in his honor and this and that. And he died of pneumonia one cold night out there in Arizona, New Mexico, just froze to death out there on the ground, got pneumonia, bad, and then collapsed out there, and then they found ice on him when they found him in the morning. He got home and got on the bottle, and after about 3 or 4 years in the bottle, he's dead. Get through combat okay. Handle Japanese bullets and barrage okay. All right. Rifle fire, artillery fire, handle okay. Not that bottle. I know when to quit, but you won't quit there. So I believe I know when to quit, and I'll quit. Yeah, you will for a while, and then something else come along. Lesson number 1. You can't go in your own strength. I'll illustrate further. Back there now, 1953, in one of these training outfits in America for war, in an artillery unit, was a fellow named Robert Stahlcup. And Robert Stahlcup was a medic in the Air Corps. And some of you couldn't understand too much I'm getting ready to say, but ground troops, even though they appreciate the junior birdmen when they show up, they don't like them. They're jealous of them because they live high in the hog and low in the chicken, you know. I mean, a fellow on the ground has to carry his house with him when he goes, and his food with him sometimes. Just carry it with him. The kitchen don't come up. But the junior birdmen can go back to base, you know, and get them a good meal. I remember coming across Pacific and those old merchant marine ships. You go by there, and there'll be fellows sailing those merchant marine ships, and you go by the galley and look at where they're eating breakfast, bacon, you know, fried eggs, toast, butter, pancakes. You go down the galley, and the guy's serving mush down there for the troops. Troops get some mush and burnt toast. You get some eggs. It's artificial eggs, you know. Sometimes they put a few eggshells in there to make it look like they broke a real egg. I don't eat breakfast at home. I eat breakfast out in the meal, out in the work where I work, out in the where I hold meetings. I usually have breakfast out there. I eat just 2 meals. Eat breakfast and eat supper. But it took me the longest while to get back into the habit of eating breakfast because of the Army. I mean, nothing worse to get in the morning and get artificial eggs and get a powdered milk and then burnt toast and rubber bacon. But the only thing good, I guess, was the coffee, and I didn't like coffee. But you see, this birdman, this guy he's a medic birdman of Air Corps, and they put him in an artillery unit to do some cleanup, a certain thing they were doing. They finished cleaning up the stuff, and he came back to barracks in a half track after doing his part. When he got back to half track, he found somebody had stole his pack with everything in it. All he had left was his helmet, his canteen, everything was gone. And he knew where the birds were. They had a wooden barracks right there, and the artillery unit was up in the wooden barracks, you know. So he walked up there and opened the door, and there were about 40 guys in the barracks. And he opened the door and said, "Who took my gear?" Just looked up at him and laughed and went back playing cards, whatever, reading comic magazines, whatever they were doing. And he said, "Who took my gear? I want the guy who took my gear." He said, "I don't have to care. If I stay up here all night, I'll throw every one of you out of the door till I find out who took it." And a big old 6-foot section chief got up there and just walked over to him and picked him up and threw him out that door about 4 feet down the hall and slammed the door. And he was about to decide, well, I might as well quit, go home and forget it. He just about made up his mind to do it. And then he had an inspiration. And he went back and opened the door and said, "Okay, who's next?" And they all got laughing, let him in, gave him his pack back and sat him down. You know, this fellow had a little bit of wisdom there. But see, sometimes you think you're going to do it in your own strength. You can do it. Out there in Texas there a couple of years back, some drunk, this probably happened more than once, some drunk came out there and came into town, you know, and went to a bar, you know, in the night and opened the door, the bar, and stepped in there. "So I'm a tough as wildcat west of Pecos, and I can whip any man in this building." And some big old boy came up, just knocked him flat, knocked him cold, hauled his body out and dumped it out in the street. And about 30 minutes later, that drunk came to and walked right back in the barroom and said, "Gentlemen, I just want to be the first to say that I made a little bit overestimate when I said what I just said." "Yeah, you did. There's one guy can whip you, and probably 50. You're not going to take on the whole town. And you're going to be a little bit too much for you to handle. You can't handle it in your own strength. Your adversary goes about as a roaring lion, seeking him to devour whom resist, steadfast in the faith. Be strong in the Lord and the power of his might." His might, not yours, his. All the plans you can make aren't going to do any good. Not when you get up against the big one. And he's up against the big one here. You take, back in World War II when it was over, the Americans came into Germany and came across the Siegfried Line. Finally got into Germany itself, crossed the Rhine, began to capture prisoners, put them in stockades. And up on the stockade there, a bunch of prisoners in it. And there was an SS colonel in there, a young colonel. SS colonel must have been only about 35 years old. Fine physical specimen, tough guy, hardened soldier. I mean, you could tell he was a prime specimen boy. And all the guys there in the stockade did what they were told and called him sir. The German troops had cohesion. They had cohesion in their ranks even after they were captured. And they said yes sir, no sir, and saluted him there in the stockade. And as the American troops began to come in and march past the stockade, going further into Germany, he'd stand by the wire there, the stockade, and scream at him and yell at him and challenge him. "Come on, fight me. Come on, give me a man out of there. Give me a man. You bunch of cowards. Who'll take me on? Come on, take me on. I dare you to take me on." That kind of stuff went on with the troops marching by there for about 20 or 30 minutes. And finally, one short fellow, about 5'9", came up to his commander and said, "Could you stop just a minute? Let me take that fellow on." He said, "Okay, if you want to." So the fellow came. He was a boxer from the Bronx. And he stepped out there and took off his pack, took off his helmet, stepped into the stockade with that fellow, and he knocked that bird down 3 times. And I mean, that fellow, that colonel was so frustrated, he just beat the ground with his fist and just cried. All his men were watching him. That fellow just up there, just knocked him flat 3 times, picked up his helmet, picked his pack, went on down the march. What was wrong with that colonel? He said, "I can handle it. I can handle it. I'm in good condition. I can whip anybody." No, mistake. He said, "I can get victory. I can get victory. You can get victory through Christ." Amen. But there's some things you're not going to get the victory over no matter how hard you try. You can quit them and make resolutions, and you can take medicine and stuff and this and that, try to get rid of them. You can take psychiatric treatment, all kinds of stuff, and you'll still have them. So the first lesson is, and I hope I got this home by now, I should have by now, you cannot go in your own strength. All right, number two, you can't go in somebody else's strength. People are people. People are human. If you can't make it, another human can't make it. You can't borrow his equipment. That's what David tries to do. You look at that verse 38 and 39. Look at there, 38 and 39. Is that thing? 38 and 39. Well, once Saul is convinced that David might be able to whip him, he said, "Okay, son, here's my armor. Go out there and get him." And he puts on Saul's armor, but Saul is 7 feet tall. David's probably about 5'10", around there someplace. He puts on the armor of a man 7 feet tall. You know what's going to happen. He's clanking around there like a ball bearing in a sardine can. And he says, "I can't go." And he says, "Why not? I haven't proved him. I haven't tried him out." In other words, you can't take another fellow's armor and do any good with it. You got to get it from someplace else. You can't handle it all by yourself, and you can't trust some other man's equipment. somebody gave me some, and I make what we call the old man's weapon. It's a sawed-off baton about that big with a loops over it. You loop it over your thumb, and you can grab a guy without losing the club. And it has a torque to it when it hits. It doesn't just come down like that. It flips like this. It crack things up good. Anyway, people give me different kind of weapons, you know, and stuff. And some of the kids, they gave me a Morning Star. Now a Morning Star is an iron ball with spikes in it, and then a chain on it. It's fast to a handle about that long. Old bike riders used to carry them. And that thing comes from Charles Martel, the hammer, from back there around, someplace back there around 500 A.D. And now that, I guess it's called the Morning Star because it makes you see stars. But they gave me that thing, but I wouldn't be able to use that thing if I had a chance. It's too heavy. I mean, you got a steel ball that big around, and then it's a steel handle it's with. You pick that thing up, bend your wrist over it. Now, some of you guys about 6'6", 6'7", you handle that thing. But not a little man. A club for the big man, a knife for the little man. That's the saying. I mean, take a baton, that's even too big for a little man. You want something you move quicker, see, instead of all this whack stuff with it. And you can't use the other guy's equipment. Years ago, a famous Southerner died. His name was Nathaniel Bedford Forrest. And he's always been kind of a role model for me. I've studied, and I did a portrait of him. I got over there at the house, and he was connected with the founding of the Ku Klux Klan up in Cleveland, Tennessee. So in 1988, the NACP in Memphis tried to put pressure on the government to dig up his body, exhume the body, had been buried for 90 years or whatever, and 100 years, whatever, and get rid of his statue in downtown Memphis. There's a statue of Nathaniel Bedford Forrest down in downtown Memphis. That's where the body is supposed to be. They want to dug up and throw away the statue for the connect of the Ku Klux Klan. Nathaniel Bedford Forrest, as a man, would make 33,000 Martin Luther King any day of the week. And why would you want to replace the body of a brave, Christian, loyal American with the body of a fornicating communist? I don't know. But I guess some folks are just so prejudiced they can't live with it. But you take Nathaniel Bedford Forrest, that guy, when he was 15 years old, now listen to me, that guy was 15 years old, you talk about somebody, if they was ever able to do something. When that guy was 15 years old, his two sisters and 3 brothers were left fatherless and motherless. And when he was 15, that bird raised those kids by himself at 15. And when he got to Memphis, he got in the cotton business. When he got in the cotton business, he made some money, made plenty of money, became a wealthy man at 18, 19, or 20, along in there. He got up around 25 there, and the Civil War broke out, and that bird entered the Confederate Army as a private. In 4 years, he was a lieutenant general. And that's a rank higher than a major general. He won a lead lieutenants. That's a lieutenant general, 4 years, private to lieutenant general, that bird. It's a man, boy, it's a man. The old bird, he died saved, too. He got saved after the war was over in the the Cumberland Valley Presbyterian Church, that old boy. And that old boy after that, he never cussed after that, never drank after that, never smoked after that. That old boy went into battle, and according to Michelle Ivan, that old fella had, he had 4 duels, 29 horses shot out from under him, and was wounded 16 times. That's pretty good for a general. You won't find a general in World War II wounded 16 times, or even World War I. 16 times, that sucker. 29 horses shot out from under him. One horse was bleeding to death, hit in the neck, and the bird leaned over the mane of the horse and held that artery together with his hand till the horse got back to camp. Good man. But he had a sword, the blade was 5 feet long. Not a sword. I'm 5'8", the blade would go from there down to my feet. Now, do you think I'd carry that saber around with me? Why'd you be a fool to use that guy's saber, man, unless you were 6'6", 6'7". So David tries to get Saul's armor on here, and it isn't going to work. It can't work. You can't make it. You take Nathaniel Bedford Forrest, the fellows that rode with him, you know what they said? They said, Ryan, that old boy said, when you made a charge, a cavalry charge with him, he said it was like a steeplechase. I was trying to see who could get there first. Just roared in there. One time he was called upon by a Union detachment to surrender, and the Union detachment had him outnumbered about 20 to 1, and must have been about 140 or 50 of them, and he only had about 10 guys with him, something like that. And he came down across the vale there, and the cavalry officers came up next to him, and surrounded his men and pulled alongside there, and the Union officer said, sir, hand over your sword. And if he looked at the look on Nathan's face, he'd never asked for it. He thought when he pulled out the sword, he'd hand it over hill first. And Nathan was right even with him like this, and just haul out the sword like that, like a samurai, and cut the bird's head off. That head went over the horse, and the blood went about 6 feet in the air, and everybody just, screamed and ran for the life, that bird. That was that character. Now, that's a man and a half there, boys. That's a man and a half. But I couldn't use his equipment. I wouldn't think of finding a 5-foot blade. The stupid thing to do. You couldn't even pick anything out of the scabbard. You'd be going, Now, there's a lesson in that, especially some of you young fellows studying for the ministry. You can't do everything I do. You don't dare imitate my lifestyle along some lines. Don't even try it. Don't even try it. I get away with it, and you can't. And that isn't all. You fellows, some of you get away with some things I couldn't get away with. Frank Norris could get away with some things I wouldn't even try. Usually when you study under a fellow, it's like kind of like your dad. You pick up all his bad habits. And some guys that study here, they pick up my bad habits, and that isn't a good idea. But you can't use the other fellow's equipment. You can't be another Ruckman. And any reason why you should be. And I can't be another J. Frank Norris or Bob Jones Sr., although I thought very highly of them. I wish I could win the soul they won. I wish I could do what they did for the Lord. I'll never get much confidence they did. I really envy those guys for what they got done in a lifetime. I never could make that. But I can't use their equipment, because I've got to use the equipment that God gave me. And using it, I've got to remember that even though it's equipment for something, I can't do it with my own strength. You've got to get that fine line there. J. Frank Norris trained some boys out there to preach, and some of them went out, and the first time they got in the church, they tried to do what he did. He fired all his deacon board. They were down there, met down the liquor store where one of the deacons was renting a liquor store, and they got down the basement of the liquor store and told J. Frank Norris, they said, we're going to give you 24 hours to get out of town. He said, I'll give you 24 of them right back, you're all fired. And boy, you talk about a mess. And they burned down the church and claimed he did it, and then they hired a guy to kill him, and then they shot the guy, and they claimed he murdered him, and God knows what. I mean, all that kind of stuff, And but some of those guys that went to the school out there, Fort Worth School out there, when they got out there, they think, well, I can do like Norris did. So the first church they got into, they tried to fire the deacon board the first week they got in the church. Well, they just hit the skids, hit the rails. You can't use somebody else's armor. You got to get your own armor. You can't use somebody else's equipment. You got to get your own equipment. When David got a hold of that stuff, you know what he said? He said, I haven't proved him yet. And keep on reading down there. He went down to the brook and got him 5 smooth stones. Now, when you read a bit later in your Bible that Goliath had 4 brothers. You know what David's done there? He got 1 rock for each one of them. He's not getting 5 stones, so if he misses Goliath, he can hit him 4 more times. He says, that fellow's got 4 brothers, and I'm going to get 1 for each one. 5 is the number of death. He gets 5 smooth stones. He gets something he can handle. Don't take on more than you can handle. The other man's equipment ain't going to do it. It'll be cumbersome. It'll load you down, mess you up. Back there in World War II, the paratroopers made a landing at D-Day, and the Germans flooded a lot of fields around Holland and France there when our paratroopers came in. And a lot of our boys, a lot of our paratroopers drowned in water that was only 3 and 4 feet high. You know what was from? Too much equipment. Too heavy equipment. They got tangled to shoot when they came down and messed up in the equipment, couldn't get the head above water. Too heavy to carry. You can't do it with another man's stuff. You have to do it on your own. Back there many years ago at the Battle of Crécy in 1346, there were 30,000 Englishmen, and they were up against 115,000 French. Boy, you talk about odds being against you, that's the odds against you. And they're up there, and what we call the Black Prince, his name was Edward. He was harassed and cut off by the French troops and about to lose everything he had and was suffering terrible casualties. And he rode up to his daddy, who was in the other part of the battle. He rode up to him on his horse and came up alongside and begged him for reinforcements. And when he came up there, he was told that the father was busy with something. He said, well, get a messenger to him and tell him something. The messenger came to Edward's daddy and said, your son is out here and wants reinforcements for his left flank. And he says, you must have him. He's at the end of his tether and can't go any further. And you know his daddy said, who couldn't spare any troops at that time? He said, tell him he'll have to get by without my help. Tell him that he alone can make himself a true knight, and he'll have to do it without me. And the messenger came back and told Edward, never went in the fight, whipped him. Outnumbered 5-1. Whipped him. Now what was he doing there? He's going to count on his daddy's equipment to get him by. And Daddy said if he makes it, he's going to make it on his own. He's going to have to use what he's got. And if you're going to make it in the battle I'm talking about against the besetting sin or against the devil or against the world, you've got to do it with the equipment you've got. Now, it's great to be around for a while and get a lot of help from other people, and that's good, and that should be. I had privileges that some of you didn't even have. I had the privilege of sitting under Bob Jones Sr. for 6 years. And we didn't hear him every week, but I've heard him an average of twice a week for 5 years. And it's a great help to be in an atmosphere like that, with a lot of Christians, a lot of people praying for you, a lot of Bible, a lot of singing, a lot of praising God. That's a great thing. But you know what happens? You know what happens. After a while, you're through. And when you get through, you know where you are? You're out. You're out where? You're out in the field. And it's just you and whatever equipment you got with you right then, that's it. You can't lean on Bob Jones Sr. anymore. You can't lean on all this Christian influence and all these saved people around you. You're out there by yourself. And then you've got to have your own equipment. That's what David realized. David said, I can't handle this stuff. Let me get my own stuff. And he goes down to the brook. And he gets his own stuff. The second lesson is you can't go on somebody else's equipment. Nowhere in the world. As David's too small. Did you know that Charles Haddon Spurgeon was 5'6"? That's 2 inches shorter than I am. You don't see that in the pictures. You know how tall John Wesley was? 5'6". You know how tall Jonathan Edwards were, and John Wesley and Spurgeon all 5'6". They had to work what they had. You can't all be 6 feet tall. You'll have to do with what you got. You can't take the other fellow's stuff. You take you say, well, these little fellows just don't have the power, or they're not able to handle the stuff the big fellows can handle. Let me tell you something. One of the toughest mobsters that ever lived was the treasurer of the Cosa Nostra in the Mafia. He was 5'4". That fellow's called Mayor Lansky. And that bird kept the books for the Mafia in his head. Mathematician. They couldn't get him in tax evasion one time because he didn't write anything down. But he's dealing with $14 billion a year that's going into, 800, 900 channels. Keeps it on his head. They took him to court 3 times. They couldn't hang a thing on him. Tough fella. Tough little fella. Tough little runt. I mean, Lucky Luciano took a liking to him back in New York. When Lucky was coming up, the way they'd get money, among other ways, and of course they had all kinds of ways of getting it. But one of the ways they do is would extort it from students. And the kid would go to school and they'd get his lunch money. Or they'd tell the kid, now you pay us so much money and we'll see if nobody beats you up. And Lucky Luciano and 4 of his buddies met Mayor Lansky when Lansky was about 15. And Lucky and that bunch were about, Genovese and Anastasia and that bunch were about 18. They met him in an alley going to school. And they said, okay, Kike. Old boy was a Jew. He said, from now on, you're going to give us so much money every week. He said, and we'll take care of you. If you don't, well, we'll beat the fire out of you. Words to that effect. And that little old fellow looked him right straight in the face. 5 of them in that alley. And cussed him. and said an expression I couldn't repeat. And when he got through, he looked at him a minute, didn't know whether to kill him or what to do, and then he laughed. It's just too funny. This guy's 5'4" here. He's 15 years old. He's surrounded with 4 and 5 guys, 5 feet 10, 6 feet tall, and 18 years old. And he laughed, and he put his arm around him and said, "You're okay, Jew baby, come on with us," and took him in. And he became the treasurer for the mafia. He died of old age. I think he's about 85 years old. You'll have to do the best what you got. I don't have the equipment other folks have, Brother Ruckman. Then you'll have to do with the equipment you've got. You can't get somebody else's. All right, finally I want to say, and you knew this was coming, you've got to depend upon God's strength only. Take your Bible there and look at verse 45 and 47. 45 and 47. You see what that is there? That's David talking. Chapter 5, or chapter 17, verse 45 and 47. You see what he tells him there? He's talking to Goliath. And he says, "You come at me with a sword and a spear, a spear and a shield, no helmet, no helmet." Said helmet, got his helmet off. Overconfident. "But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts." And he said, "You defied the armies of Israel." David believed the Bible. And he says, "God's going to deliver me into your hand." And he says in that passage, he says, "I'm going to take you and cut off your head." Isn't that something to say? What are you going to cut it off with? A sling? I got a sling and a staff. He got him a sling and a staff, and he said, that giant, he says, "You know what I'm going to do?" He said, "What you going to do? I'm going to cut off your head." Now, don't you know that was a hee-haw to that giant? Don't that giant heard him say, when he said that, he said, "Yeah, man, what you doing about you cut off my head with that damn staff?" The Philistines are from Ham. How many knew that? Let me see your hands. Well, the rest of you grow up and learn something. And what are you going to cut off my head with, honey? That staff? And he said, I'm going to give your flesh the fowls of the air. Look down there in verse 47. That all the earth may know, look at that, the battle is whose? Who? Say it again. All right, you in a battle? All right, whose battle is it? It's the Lord's. The Lord's battle. And Paul says, fight the good fight of faith. He's very careful to tell you, be strong in the Lord and the power of his might. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against angels, against spiritual wickedness in high places, principalities, powers, the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. That's what he says. And so the battle is the Lord's. We're going to have to fight it. One of those pastors there said the Philistine cursed David by his gods. See, there's a religious issue here. The battle's the Lord's. That's why it's the Lord's battle, because he's cursing David by his gods. And he's defied the armies of the God of Israel. There's a religious thing involved. It isn't just your battle. It's the Lord's battle. Zechariah chapter 4, verse 6. You know what it says? It says, it's not by might or by power, but by my Spirit. By my Spirit, saith the Lord. That's the business. The Holy Spirit is going to give you the victory. And without him, you can't get the victory. I think one time my little boy was building blocks, a little Christian boy. He was about 7 or 8 years old and building a pile of blocks. And every time he'd just about get the last block on, the whole thing would fall down. He'd get mad, and he'd bang around, throw blocks, and say some children's cuss words, good night, gosh darn, golly, all that kind of stuff, golly and gee whiz and all this kind of stuff. And about the 4th or 5th time he tried it, he was almost in tears because it just fall apart every time he did it. And finally one time, about the 5th time he tried it, he started to blood him up, and he bowed his head and prayed for a change and said, Lord, please help me to get these blocks together and help me not to get mad this time. And that time the Lord let him get them together. Be strong in the Lord and the power of his might. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rule of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. He's the rock. He's the rock. And if you're gonna win it, you're gonna have to win it with him. He's the one that stands and can't be moved. You can be moved. He can't be moved. He's the rock. Rock of ages. Cleft for me. Let me hide myself in thee. Be strong in the Lord and the power of his might. That's the rock. One time back there, J. Frank Norris was preaching, back around 1920 someplace, there was an express train that came to a gorge out there in Texas where the walls of the cliffs go up on both sides of that track there and come down so close to the track that the cars going through it hit somebody if they were off the track, because the cliff came right down next to where the car was. And a little girl back there, about 15 years old, was back there with little brother one day, and the express came through there, and she took her little brother and got him up the side of that cliff about 8 feet and got him to hang onto a rock up there, a big boulder. And as that express roared through there, she yelled at him and said, "Hold on the rock, Jimmy, hold on the rock, hold on the rock." Well, thank God we don't have to hold on the rock. But you know who the rock is. And that's the one that can't be moved. It's going to take God to do it for you. You're going to have to trust him. Old Stephen Talmage says what we need today is a brawny religion. He said a man's religion. He says there are certain Christians that get through life without making too many enemies. They don't offend much of anybody. And he said, thank God for them. They have a place in the Lord's work. He said there are certain Christians that get through life without causing too much trouble. And he says they're good people and try to do right, and thank God for them. They have a place in the Lord's work. But he said we need some people that will stand up and fight. And as Paul says, he says, fight the good fight of faith. That's what we need. I don't mean to speak down to you ladies. I mean, I've got a good wife, loves the Lord. I wouldn't trade her for any woman on the face of this earth. I'm not speaking down to you, but I'm telling you we need some men in this country. And the trouble is the shortage of men. There's no shortage of women. The shortage of men. He says, help, Lord, for the good man is perished out of the earth. Well, they step out there, and that old giant comes up and says, I'm going to get you. And David says, you may going to get me, but I represent the Lord, and you ain't going to get him. And he winds up and says, dear Lord, bless this shot and put it where you want it to go. And that thing comes out, old boy, and smacks him in the head. And boy, like I said, when that thing smacks you there at 30 or 40 feet, I mean, it's just good as a 45 right through your skull, man. Blood all over the place. And that's something they often forget to show that in some of these realistic movies. But when you hit a guy with a bullet, the blood splatters. These high-powered bullets they shoot in these Vietnam pictures and stuff, that hits you, you get a spray. I mean, the arteries there, man, the veins there. That thing, it goes like that. And that thing, somebody smacks that bird right in the head, and down he goes, crash. And David sits up there and takes the sword and cuts off his head. And then, boy, there's a shout of victory from one side of that mountain, the other side of that mountain. Here come the Jews, boy, and those Philistines are running for their lives. And the Lord won a great victory that day. Now, are you in the battle? Are you going to stay in the battle? Are you going to desert? General Patton says, cowardice is epidemic. That if one man gets running, 2 men run. 2 men run, 3 men run. 3 men run, 10 run. See, 10 running, they're joined by 20. Pretty soon it's 50, then it's 100. First thing you know, the whole division's running. Cowardice is epidemic. You want to stay in the battle till the Lord comes. When the Lord comes, you're going to find you still waiting, waiting for the Lord to come. You're going to find you ready for the Lord to come. Back in 1920, a Civil War veteran, who then was 80 years old, took one of his grandchildren down to Atlanta, Georgia, and he wanted to see the cyclorama down there. And she took him down and got down there, and of course, it's kind of funny, he was blind. He'd been blind for 55 years, but he said, I heard about that battle in Atlanta, and he said, I wanted to have you describe it for me. So he went down there to cyclorama I told you about, I think this morning or sometime. And when he got down there, the Jenny took him by the hand, led him around the circle, and explained things to him. That old veteran who was blinded, he was blinded in the Battle of Atlanta, been blind 55 years. And he'd ask her questions. And he'd say, Jenny, he says, do you see a wheat field around there? She said, well, some kind of a field. He said, well, there should be something growing over there that looks kind of like wheat, but he said, it ain't. And he said, do you find any cotton bales around there in place? He said, yeah, good, Grandpa, there's some cotton bales here piled up. And he said, they buy a building? And she said, yes, a building. I don't know what kind of building it is. He said, it's a schoolhouse. And he said, now, what do you see over the right of that? She said, well, I see a bunch of smoke and a bunch of guns and horses and things. And the old man began to shake, kind of quiver, and said, now tell me, Jenny. He said, where those horses and guns are. He said, are those big guns, are they cannons? She said, yes, Daddy. And he said, are they shooting? He said, I don't know, Daddy. There's a lot of smoke and the big explosions look like they're in the air. And the old man began to quiver, and he said, right up there, about halfway across that field, behind that schoolhouse, do you see any explosions in the air over there with those cannons? And she said, yes, there's a lot of them over there. And he rested back in his cane and said, Jenny, that's the last thing I ever saw before God took my eyes from me. He right by that cannon. That's where he lost his eyesight. You say, in where? In battle. In battle. Lost his eyesight in battle. When the Lord finally comes, it's all over. Are you going to be found in the front line? We sing here, keep on the firing line. Is that where you're going to be? Lord comes. Going to be back in the bivouac, taking it easy, back in the barracks, taking it easy. Or out in the front trying to, cut the troops out of the rations or keep them from getting food or cut off their supplies or turn them over to the enemy or splitting ranks or giving away or deserting. You're going to be found where the firing going on. Be strong in the Lord and the power of his might. Let's go to the Lord in prayer.